Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What I'd like to talk to you is about the practicalities of innovation, what pushes it and what holds it back, and how, in a way, it relates to the subtitle of my book, which is why water, or urban water for all, is essential, achievable, and affordable. First of all, let's take a consideration about why it is necessary to have innovation. There was a rather interesting paper published in Nature a couple of years ago, which was the first attempt to globally map what is happening to water and threats of water for about 16 different criteria at a fairly close level. And they concluded what we were able to outline was a planet-wide pattern of threat. The data was somewhat old, but the reality is probably worse. They highlighted 3.4 billion people being under threat. What you see in this chart here, the areas which are yellow is simply biodiversity threat. The areas which are red, you could say there's an existential threat to people being able to survive in the long run on the way water resources are being used. And note how China and India are particularly affected by this. Why is Europe and America just yellow, not red? That is because of the trillions of pounds spent to date on developing water infrastructure. Their report highlighted that their estimate was that 800 billion euros would have to be spent just amongst the BRIC countries by 2015. These numbers are rather iffy numbers in a sense, but it gives you an idea about what people in the scientific world are seeing about issues affecting water. So, where are we at the moment in the global sense? Last year there was some very pleased people in the United Nations who announced that the Millennium Development Goals for cutting the number of people without access to what they called improved water had already been met. This is fantastic. Apart from one tiny little thing, improved water is an utterly meaningless definition. It doesn't mean drinkable, it doesn't mean reliable, it doesn't mean safe. So yes, we have 12% of the world's population now with unimproved water, compared with 23% 10 years earlier. But in terms of unsafe water, and unsafe water can be defined either in terms of the quality of the water you drink, or the quality of water you drink and the risk of cross-contamination from poor sanitation. What they're actually finding is that the targets are not going to be met by a very, very long way. So 46% of the world's population, in fact, looks like it's going to be facing unsafe water rather than the 9% improved. You will often hear people get very upset telling us, gosh, there are 780 million people without safe water in the world today. Unfortunately, the real figure is 3.5 billion. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the threat and the need for innovation on water and wastewater. Then let's take a look at the British agenda. What we're seeing in Britain is that leakage reduction, having been a somewhat academic figure for a decade, is going to be coming up the agenda. Obviously, last year we have seen the floods and droughts. If you remember, a year ago it was about the threat we were having 20 million people going to have water restrictions. That is now a somewhat distant memory. But it highlights the need, what are we going to do with sewerage, for example? How much foul sewerage do we have? How much storm sewerage, which is meeting the foul sewerage system? We're having to rethink the way we manage water. Our real problem is if Ofwat continues to press ahead with its idea of using competition as an ideological tool. So you could have a water treatment work being run by one company, the water network being run by another, a sewage treatment work by a third, and the sewerage network by a fourth, all in competition with each other. It doesn't sound very coherent. It is very much to be hoped that that area of competition is going to be put where it belongs, firmly in the dustbin. Meanwhile, the water framework is still coming on. It was supposed to be met in 2015. Now it looks like 2029. And it's fascinating to look at what the Department of the Environment says about various river catchment areas, where it simply said no technical solution currently available to meet these targets. So plenty of need for innovation in the next 2 decades. One of the more interesting directives coming out of Europe is the revision of the Bathing Waters Directive, where they're going to ask us to have real-time reporting of testing data. That's also going to push forward testing. It's actually going to move into an era where tourists will decide to go to which beach, depending on the bathing water quality tests in real time. So instead of being something you look at an annual guide, you'll actually be able to make informed decisions. Again, that creates a huge new area of opportunities for wastewater treatment and wastewater handling. The problem then finally, off what is at last, after 20 years, opening up to the concept of innovation and the concept of efficiency, not as a game you play within a 5-year AMP, but as a long-term sustainable part of corporate growth. That is the carrot. The stick is that this week Ofwat said, with price rises in the future, they want to see the sector, and to quote them, share the pain, which could be rather interesting all round. One of the ways of looking at this is to consider the impact of energy on driving innovation and driving costs in the water sector. This is the most up-to-date figures which are available, but they are quite interesting. Simply, the more you treat water, the more you treat wastewater, the more you have to pump it. So, as the infrastructure gets more advanced, there's more to do. Then, of course, there's the impact of electricity price rises. So it would be fair to say that the latest data, when it becomes available, will be more dramatic than this. Even so, we can see that sewerage, the proportion of cost taken up by electricity, has nearly doubled in a 6-year period. Sewage treatment, likewise. Fascinatingly, sludge treatment is fallen by 40% as the first generation of waste-to-energy techniques comes through in the digestion process. And this is very much one of the great themes putting through the whole of wastewater treatment at the moment. We have to move out of the old view of looking at wastewater as a waste and see it as a resource, an embedded source of energy, an embedded source of nutrients, and of course a water resource in the end. Companies involved in that area are going to have great fun. Bear in mind, depending on which calculations are used, you get 4 to 7 units of energy out of every unit of wastewater you take on board. So it's a resource, it's something to innovate, it's something to do well with. How do we respond? Looking out in the global world, I think one of the interesting ones is mobile communications and water. Now, as we're all aware, one of the reasons why we're not allowed to invest in water and wastewater is that people can't afford to have water. They have to, around the world, they have to have the old, tired and outdated paradigm of poor or no services because they're not able or willing to pay. Yet, for example, in Kenya, once you start having something which is an elective choice, people start to decide for themselves rather than the politicians deciding for them. In 2008, people who subscribed to mobile phones in Kenya spent 17% of their household incomes on mobile phones. Why? Not because they were being ripped off, but because the benefits of mobile phones for a farmer and so on and so forth outweighed that cost. Of course, people are unhappy with their water service, but they don't have a choice. Now, it's already moving in various areas. We've got in Africa, we're seeing mobile phone companies offering remote bill payment. It used to be it took 3 to 5 hours to pay your monthly water bill. Now it takes 3 to 5 seconds. It helps the utility too. Entire new areas in water management and water reporting are moving up in the developing world through mobile phones. The last 2 years, we've seen the World Bank having water and sanitation hackathons. Give you an example, Tremolay Consulting's Upraise My Loo. This came up last year. It's a way that individuals, utilities and governments can log on using an app, every single lavatory, how they've got it, how it's performing, how much it costs, and so on and so forth. To use the pun, it is very much a bottom-up approach. giving a top-level understanding of what's going on. You might say that there is a mobile phone spring taking place in developing economies because it bypasses the old power routes and the old communications routes and allows real-time, real understanding of what's going on in utilities. Another example of the choice, especially with disruptive technologies, can be seen in India. Access to pipe water in the last decade has soared from 20 to 23%, and as with improved sanitation, 25 to 34%. Fixed line phones have stayed the same, mobile phones 0 to 63% access. Why? Because there is a choice. People again elect to have a mobile phone. No one's forced to have one, but it demonstrates that people around the world are willing to pay for things when they're better. The great irony in India, 63% have access to a mobile phone and something like 50% still have to crap in the open. So it's a very strange thing, isn't it? You're not allowed to have a lavatory, but you're allowed to have a mobile phone. Where are our sense of priorities? So what do we do about this? Well, I think one of the ways we respond is to get smart about our water. I regard smart water as covering advanced metering, monitoring, automation, testing, communicating all that information, managing all that information, and taking it allowing people, both the utility and the customer, to make an informed decision with that information. And there's also the advanced irrigation system market. Globally, perhaps 0.5 to 1% of the world water market goes into smart at the moment. That's up to $1 billion a year. Depending on who you believe, market forecasts are going for a range of 5 to 16 billion, or 3 to 9% of the market by 2020. The range of the forecasts, of course, reflects the poor quality of data which permeates the whole water sector, and differing views about the trajectories of the way technology is going to develop. Now, one of the best ways of looking at water in terms of its attractiveness to investors and so on is to relate water to clean tech venture capital. According to Clean Tech Group, a magnificent 3% of all clean tech funding in a 5-year period went to water companies. And in the smart water sector, 80 million out of 3.9 billion went to smart, out of the smart sector. An average investment of $5 million against $12 million for the average smart and clean tech investment. It's a very difficult market to be in. There are many companies who regard water as not a part of clean tech, which is a rather strange way of looking at the world. The real problem, of course, is, as we all know here, is getting the concept to the reality. Since 2006, there's been a fundamental shift away from early stage to late stage investment. And globally, there still remains just one company, XPV Capital of Toronto, which is dedicated to clean tech water. And one of the challenges for VC, in a sense, is the number of VC companies with just 1 or 2 investments in the sector, and there are only about 4 in the world which have more than 4 investments in water. So it's a dilution of expertise which needs to be met. How do we respond? Well, the first one, let's take a look at some international examples. In Singapore, since 1965, water has been seen as a priority issue for the company, for the island state. In 2011, the Public Utilities Board was charged with making Singapore self-sufficient by 2060 by desalination, wastewater recovery, water efficiency, and demand management. All inland water is monitored real-time using a smart grid. So they've changed the rivers and the lakes and indeed the streets from being a conduit of water to being a water storage system. PUB itself has brought forward 294 private sector R&D projects. One, for example, over a 7-year period was for wastewater recovery, and during all the stages of that 7-year period, they improved energy efficiency by 300%. So it shows what a long-term, stable relationship with an efficiency-minded utility can do for the sector. It's turned Singapore into a regional hub for innovation, and PUB has an open mind about bringing this innovation to its own company. So it's happy to use the private sector when it's more efficient. It's happy to keep things in-house when they can do the job better. It's an open-minded approach with the long term in mind. In Israel, Mekarot, the state utility, set up the Water Technologies Entrepreneurship Centre. The idea of this being that they will give you every form of support to bring through new ventures, so long as they meet their technical standards and you're prepared to have a firm but fair partner. Along with this, they had a funding program was set up with a series of incubators, which has generated $700 million in private funding. And you compare that with the VC figure worldwide, it shows you how important it is to have a stable and strong relationship with a utility. Finally, in Israel, it's fascinating to note that the utilities have strict financial incentives to minimize leakage and maximize water recovery. There's nothing like a real financial incentive for innovation. Malta. Now, of course, we know that in Britain, meters, let alone smart meters, are highly controversial. I remember a government minister telling me that we cannot afford meters in this country. And indeed, Ofwat tells us that smart meters are too expensive for Britons. It's extraordinary, isn't it? You have 100% metering in Cambodia, urban areas. You have 100% metering in urban Uganda. But we can't afford it in Britain. It says something about our country. Or does it say something about our politicians? Now, in Malta, they have a fundamental problem about water and a dependence on desal, which of course is not the cheapest way of getting your water. In 2008 and 2009, the government set up a series of policies for national utility smart metering. The point about this is not only that every household has a smart meter, but it's an integrated smart and water electricity meter. The rollout is continuing and will finish at the end of this year at a cost of €163 per meter. And things, of course, get really interesting when you have integrated metering, because every time you run a bath, you know not just how much it's going to cost you in water, but how much it costs in electricity. And as we all know, people respond much more to an electricity bill than a water bill. How is England and Wales perceived in this context? It's quite dismal, I'm afraid. I was asked by the OECD last year to do a survey of policy as a driver and a hindrance to innovation in smart technologies for water. And Britain, unfortunately, did come out bottom amongst all advanced countries. Why? Because we have contradictory policy developments. Ofwat wants one thing, DEFRA wants another, but Ofwat dominates the sector. And it does mean that we have incoherent network for companies to develop, for utilities to respond, for technologies to be brought up in. Typically, water is not a priority area, except when we have flood or drought. So it certainly was a priority last year. Will it be a priority next year? We need to have a perceived high-profile framework for assisting and bringing and encouraging innovation and its commercialization in the UK. We do have quite a lot of networks and quite a lot of frameworks, but they'd have such a low profile in the public eye. And finally, we have to get beyond the idea that testing and benchmarking is still done by a single utility and you have to go to the next utility to get business, to a real understanding that if utility A approves of a technology, utility B will be able to use that data as well. Looking across the world, another project I had to do for the OECD was to say how much is it going to cost to have universal access to water and sanitation in developing countries and in the OECD countries a properly functioning water and wastewater system. My estimates came out between 190 and 225 billion being spent on CapEx against the current level of 170. That's not a very great jump. There are two reasons for that. One, I never believe that there is going to be some great jump in capital spending. It's just simply not going to happen. We've been told it's about to happen for 20 years. It's not going to happen. We have to learn to deliver more for less. Secondly, the scope for innovation and making things more effective is so vast. And thirdly, of course, there's areas to improve data allows people to make improved choices about costs, to eliminate corruption, and to incentivize utilities to use the best technologies for the right appropriate and the most appropriate approach. So we can do an awful lot more than we do today with not very much more money. There's a reason for this, and I think one of the things is money is well spent. This is a somewhat odd little chart. What it shows is how GNP has grown over a nearly 50-year period and relates it to the development of the water and wastewater infrastructure. Where the numbers are in black, that means less than 90% of the population have improved piped water, sewerage, and sewage treatment. Red, you're starting to see universal water. Green, you're starting to see universal sewerage. And brown, universal secondary or tertiary wastewater treatment. Now, Singapore and Malaysia start off in 1962 with a similar GNP per capita. 40 years later, Singapore has nearly 5 times as much per capita wealth, and it has a fully operating integrated water network. Malaysia remains a third world country. I would put it to you that investing in water and wastewater infrastructure is a spur for economic growth rather than a hindrance. In the UK, where should we go? What should be our priorities? Well, first of all, can we have some coherence, please? We are a uniquely asset-intensive industry. Such an industry needs predictability. One of the areas here is to get away from the ping-pong policy about metering. Simply go for comprehensive metering and give it a proper date, 2020 or 2030, rather than the incremental targets we go. Can we get smart? We appreciate the role smart water has in driving innovation, sustainability, and efficiency. What about being smart on tariffs? The reason why Tendring Hundred is now part of Affinity Water was the only water company in southeast England last year in the spring not to have drought orders is because they have seasonal tariffs. Their water usage is 80% of the England and Wales norm as a result, and they also have 90% metering. So forget the debate, embrace reality. And finally, we need to look at water on a river basin basis. We need to get smart about policy as well as technology. Finally, what about enabling innovation? Well, we have to accept that in terms of clean tech, we're always going to be the poor cousin. There's no new dawn coming. We have to live within our limits. That also means, of course, that the need for innovation is greater than ever. This is going to be a remarkable 2 decades for the water sector for companies who can come up with what people need. Unless your offering is small, better and cheaper, who's going to be interested in you? If those of you who've gone to the Wet Network events over the last few years may recall that in 2006, 2007, all the talk was about our equipment is shinier and better. Came 2008 and the financial crisis, and we started seeing companies for the first time saying our equipment is cheaper and is going to save you money as well. This is a fundamental contrast to the water sector in the last recession, 1991 to 93, where they simply said water is recession-proof, and many companies went under as a consequence. Are you getting your message across? So many companies I have known over the years have wonderful kit, wonderful processes, and they live for that kit and that process, but they are simply incapable of communicating it to any intelligent third party. Also, management isn't about bringing a new idea to the table, it's about managing. The new idea is there, that's great, you've done that. How are you going to make it work? How are you going to make people buy it? How are you going to finance yourself? And without wishing to be too blunt, I would take a very long, hard, cold look at Blue Water Bio as an example here of, first of all, being able to get a message across, and secondly, in a sense, moving away from the technology-oriented management to saying, right, we've got our kit, we've got our engineers, and we, as management, manage the process and ensure that the company stays solvent and is in a position to grow and to exploit change. So it's all there. And one of the things I would love to see is a real boom on the mentoring side of venture capital to help companies understand this and to capitalize on the opportunities that are out. So going towards a smarter water policy, well, we have to get the politics out of water. It's not a proxy for political debates. It's simply about doing things better. We have to move from the traditional way of just saying how much water can we throw at a problem to saying how much less water can we use. That's the only way of securing supplies in an affordable and a sustainable way is going to be through demand management. One of the ways I think this is going to come through is when people really understand the linkages between water and energy efficiency and the dualities and the synergies between the two. And innovators can thrive and companies can thrive and we can all do good business in water when management can get the message across and we get the politics out of water and we get the excellence back into it. Thank you very much.